Clearly there's been disruption at every level, and I mean, more is going on in my lifetime than I've ever imagined at one time. So clearly the stoppage, when sports were going to come back, when they were going to start. Um, and I find it interesting. Like right now, you have the NBA who's starting up. When we might actually be at the peak of the pandemic from in terms of positive cases. They started up in a bubble, same as the NHL. They started up in a bubble in a time where the pandemic was actually at a low point. And now they're coming back at a time where they will be traveling and playing in home venues. And I think all that comes down to play of trying to get back to some level of normalcy when they plan this out. But I think you saw the bubbles were fairly successful in terms of positivity rates and the like. And then the NFL sort of came back in at a time of almost being normal, like coming back at its regular time, regularly scheduled weekly thing. That was the first time people were going to have the opportunity to get back to real, their traditions and their norms of their life. But it wasn't fully that way because at the same time, there was sports competition that we've never seen before. You had NBA games going against NFL games, against hockey games. I think, the first NFL game of the season you had going against NHL playoffs and NBA playoffs, and you had the Houston Rockets and the Houston Texans playing it on the same night. And that things like that just haven't happened before. So sports disrupted sports in some way. But I think from a fan perspective, nothing's normal, and everyone has their traditions and their habits of how they watch and consume sports. And whether you are the season ticket holder and a tailgater, that clearly didn't happen this year. But that's not the only sort of gathering of how people enjoy sports. And it could be in a sports bar, it could be just at a friend's house or having people at your own house. So that communal aspect of sports, aside from being at the game itself, was pretty much disrupted. So you just have disruption in how people consume sports, because out of those people, there are some people who are not necessarily as engaged in a sport as they once were, because they're not doing it with their buddies, with their friends, with that camaraderie that is part of it. Then you had within that, with NFL, with college, you had disruption along the way, games taking place on Wednesdays, and even in the NBA, you had games taking place in the middle of the afternoon. And so while we're slowly getting back to there, it's not the same, and nor is sort of everyday life for fans. So that's changing too. Even though sports are on the air and the like, it's just not fully back. So I don't even think we're going to be able to look at this time in these sports and be able to compare them, look back and say, well, this is what happened in this trend and that trend. They're not necessarily there. Could there be some trends that are enduring? Yeah, but I think there were trends that were there and they may have accelerated. I think what the discussion around college athletics and the athletes in that was something that was already there that may gain some momentum coming out of this, of these amateur athletes actually playing during a pandemic, and that is going to the Supreme Court and the like of the compensation, as well as baseball, which was not trending in a great direction from a fans consumption standpoint, and that could be accelerated. But that's not something that came out of it. It's more of an acceleration. I think things like the protests and the like, all that is part of this. I don't know if they're necessarily enduring things that are going to happen out of this.
So tell us about how you see network programmers and how they've dealt with it, how they've been creative, both from the programming side, the technical side, their willingness to work with marketers like your team.
Yeah, I think well, there's two things. Like certainly during the when we were in a complete stoppage at times, from bringing back older programmings to things that were happening. Documentaries have been around for a while, but the way ESPN surrounded the Michael Jordan documentary was a big one. You also had, so things like that came. How they managed the NFL draft, even just the other night, the Heisman Trophy presentation. So how they've adapted to doing things like that remotely. Some aspects of those things will stay, because if you look at it from a production standpoint, we've seen in so many places during this pandemic across all industries of something that was there that is now accelerated because of this. The remote broadcasting was something that was there for some games that has accelerated and will continue to accelerate. Camera angles, because they've had access to angles on things and camera positions that they ordinarily wouldn't because they're not dealing with people surrounding them. How they will, adapt to that may change. Similar to even how they've adapted stadiums themselves, where it's not always about the game itself, it's more about the experience around it within the building. And I think they've done a good job of evolving how they're talking about the games that are around it. Some technology has come out from, you may see more and more of that coming out. The different signage opportunities within stadiums and venues. Some will go away and some will stick around of the value, because there is an economic loss in all of this. The leagues have lost money, the networks have lost some money, but the teams have been challenged on the local level. When you look at the teams themselves, they've had challenges. The local media, the RSNs, they've had real challenges, because you think of the fourth quarter, no RSN actually had live sports programming throughout the fourth quarter. That's a whole quarter of revenue lost. So they've all had to get a little creative to bring things to the market, not only the way the games are presented, but also of new opportunities for brands and marketers to engage. And I think they've all stepped up in how they engage in social media.
Tom, I wanted to ask, what about your brands? What do they expect from sports? What are they looking for, and how do you structure investment right now to reach their needs? I mean, of course, every client has a different need, but how are things changed in terms of live spots, integrated marketing? How have things changed? What are the opportunities?
Well, I think if you look at sports and the history of even like a sports marketing space, you have it started as really an experiential space in and around the stadium and hospitality and that. That has all been put on hold, right, during this time. So we work with a number of clients of how do we get more innovative of how we engage clients and brands, and then you get into an area of capacity. The networks, because of the you have declining ratings, you have less games in some cases, you get to a point of capacity is not available in terms of 30-second spots. So how do you get creative around the edges? So how do you create and market outside of those 30-second pods, which is something we've always looked to do anyway. But what other opportunities have come out of this to create some storytelling for the brand that is authentic and involved, and we certainly do it on an ongoing basis within live sports. We've also, and I think going back to The Last Dance with ESPN and what we did with State Farm, of taking advantage of an opportunity at that time and how you can adjust to it and make it work for the time. That show aired 2 months before it was supposed to air, and it was really a collaboration between us, our client State Farm, as well as ESPN to bring something like that to life. And would that have been the same way if we were in normal times? No, we probably would have been more focused on executing around the NBA Finals, and that would have been a nice add-on to that. Instead, it took center stage. And how we're working with the broadcasters to insert brands in a way that's not disruptive to the broadcast, that the value is going to come forth. And we've had clients come to us and say, listen, we had an experiential program. Can we create some kind of program, contest, promotion that could be driven by media, because it was going to be something that was going to be on the ground that we just can't get capacity at that. So some of those things will continue to evolve in that way. And then in that case, maybe you can achieve multiple things that the different marketing channels were going to drive towards. but now you can bundle it all through a media program that can actually accelerate it and add scale to it.
Tom, there's you know, a growing distribution mix of platforms carrying live sports now, from Peacock to Amazon and others. Um, what are those opportunities? How do you see taking advantage of those opportunities for your clients?
Well, one thing I will say, and one thing that is unique to sports from a live perspective, for the most part, it's additive. So a Thursday night game that airs on Amazon, so there was one game on a weekend, but for the Thursday night games that air on Amazon are also airing on Fox. And that same commercial reel is airing on Amazon as well as Fox. So to us, it's an additive view. It's almost as if you have a product to sell in a store, you want it to be available as many stores possible and as many aisles within that store as possible to create more distribution, more access to the product. So we do see that as actually growth. And to be clear, a lot of the cord cutters who have cut their traditional cable and just have not signed up and viewing only OTT, they tend not to be big sports fans because sports fans want access to their cable. And there's only a handful of games that are exclusively available through OTT products. So we look at it as additive, but the value that we can get out of it, clearly right now there's more access to insight into data to some of these platforms. So if we can learn more about who the sports fan is and who's engaging, the more we can learn about who they are and define that audience a little better beyond the traditional metrics. And all this is learning. I think the NFL, the leagues have done it as learning for potentially when it does continue to grow. But right now, it doesn't cannibalize, it's only additive.
And finally, a lot of talk about reach, a lot of talk about audience acquisition. Live sports is massive. Tell us about live sports and its value for reach, and also perhaps opportunities around targeting.
Reach, when you just simply go down and look at the top programs on television. I mean, it's sports. It's primarily football. We are a football nation. And so that is where people are still gathering. It's appointment. There's not the ability to watch, in different platforms at different times in non-commercial environments. And it's also where, if you look at what wins Emmy Awards each year now in television, it's not always broadcast commercial television shows. You've got Netflix shows, you have Amazon, you have other non-commercial environment. The top sports program and the most sought after and the biggest ones are all programs that are available on over-the-air commercial television. That's probably not going to change in the foreseeable future. And you even see when you have games that like-to-like games that moves from broadcast to cable, you see a decline in the audience. You even see the size of the audience. And ESPN had a simulcast of their Monday Night Football game. The size of the audience was much larger on ABC, which is not a normal environment where people are watching a Monday Night Football game, but it was this portion of people who are viewing all over-the-air television. So you might say there's a heyday for over-air television. And if you look at Fox, of what they've done, of how they are centered their whole broadcast network around the growth of sports. So it's real, it's live. I think you're going to see a lot of that in the Olympics. And yes, the Olympics is going to be across multiple channels and every distribution platform that there is available to NBC. But the bulk of that consumption is still going to take place through television. And there's a lot of value in that. There really is of people together to reach a mass audience at one time still has a lot of value for multi-billion-dollar brands. But what are we learning from an audience standpoint? And that's where all of these other platforms come into play. We don't see mass scale to the level of television through a lot of these social channels and the like, but what we do have a little more of an understanding of is who the folks are. And we hope that is what we're going to see from many of these OTT platforms, and a better understanding of who the sports viewer is, so you can better tailor your messaging. Is it going to be a one-to-one conversation right now in sports? I don't see that in the foreseeable future, but I think there is a real opportunity to engage the fan with authentic creative and being in the right environment with the right messaging. Because the one thing we have in common with all those people who are consuming that, they're there to consume that content. So how you can align your brand with the content, I think, and you see a lot of brands do it in sports, having sports centric advertising. You can call them influencers, you can call them endorsers, but when you see athletes endorsing brands and in commercials, that's part of being in an authentic environment.